feel buried alive. This city is airtight, suffocating, lonely in the crowd. I'm surrounded by all the screens of their lives, screaming into space to drown them out. I fell down so low, felt nowhere to go, but I know you wait for me, you wait for me. So far out of sight, sucked into the white, but I know you wait for me. I'm coming home, I'm coming back down tonight, 'cause I've been hypnotized by the lights. But I'm coming home, I'm coming back down tonight. Yeah, it's taken time to realize, but I'm coming home, I'm coming back down tonight. So hold me tight, I just wanna fade out, somewhere we can shut the world away. I'm ready to hide, far from the fallout. They won't find us in the paradise we'll make. I fell down so low, found nowhere to go, but I know you wait for me, you wait for me. So far out of sight, sucked into the white, but I know you wait.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kalman, Beres and Nikolay Dobrev.
Whenever you're ready. Yeah. Good day, everybody. So welcome to this session on Troubleshooting Business Central on SaaS environments. My name is Kalman Beres, and I'm here with Nikolay Dobrev, my colleague. His
Hello.
first time ever. So his first presentation ever. So bear in mind.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, so today's agenda is we are going to talk a little bit about telemetry. Then we are going to delve more into in-client tools. Then we are going to show you some of the debugging enhancements we have done for the October release. Then more on snapshot debugging and a little bit on profiling. Thank you, and I give the word to Nikolay.
Hello. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to today's session. I'll probably cover some of the topics that you already saw in the keynote earlier today. So you heard about telemetry. Vincent talked about it. However, we can't really talk about troubleshooting SaaS environments without mentioning telemetry. So tomorrow will be another session about it, where you can get in-depth knowledge, but we should point out what you can actually learn from telemetry. You can get information about all kinds of events and what has been performed on your environments. Also, a new thing from this release is our Power BI, Power BI app, which was demoed on the keynote. You can find it here on that URL. Please go and visit. In addition to telemetry, and in addition to the in-client profiler that you saw presented by Ida, we have multiple other tools in the client that you can use to troubleshoot your environment. We have multiple scenarios that can be covered, and you can discover issues only in the client. So I'll take you on a journey to the web browser, where we can actually go and see how powerful the client is. So I'm opening the browser now, and our first stop is how we can troubleshoot the connectivity. I believe you see. Yes? So here you can see a checksum with different steps, and basically what we do here is we check the connectivity between currently our web browser to your tenant. So I'll run the check. You can see everything's supposed to be good. Yes, it is good. If something fails, for example, you fail to log in, or the CDN is down, you get actually an information and hints what might have been wrong and how you can fix it. So let's jump to Business Central. You can find the connectivity check actually on the usual Business Central URL, and if you have different environments, you can go / your environment name and then / connectivity. So we have the Business Central here open, and I'll jump to customers, and we'll start our journey from here. So what you should first do when you have issues and you want to find information in the client is to go to the question mark button up here, and then go to Help and Support. You saw that page earlier today, so I won't really cover much about it, but I want to say that up here in Troubleshoot, you have useful links to, for example, get to know the last known error, apparently known errors in that environment. You can inspect pages or analyze the performance using the in-client profiler. You'll hear more about performance later, yes. Down there we have report a problem. Here you can get metadata that is very useful for us. So when you have issues, you should send us, for example, everything that is up here. And you can see also information about your client and server session ID. So please remember that server session ID because it will come in handy later in that session. And you can also enable additional logging. So let's go to Inspect Pages and open the Page Inspector. Here, for example, you can get information about all the table fields and what extension they're coming from. We can see the extension. We can see page filters also, which are applied on that page. We can see the extensions. Besides the usual suspects, system application, base application, you can see that I have a demo extension now. We will discover what it does. In addition, you can see how long each of the extensions has taken or they have contributed when you open the current page. So what does my extension do? It actually doesn't do anything good. So I will show you. I've added two actions here. The first one, prepare our press, and the second one is do harm. Let's see what do harm will do. So I'll jump afterwards to employee list. It's another custom page, and I'll try to add an employee, just a demo employee. Let's say John Doe, and then an address test. And we can see that it hangs. We cannot save right now. So what is happening? We can go to database logs and try to see information up here, and we can see that there is a database log on that particular table, so we can't really save the information. And you can see also from which session ID that database log has been acquired, and that's actually the session ID that I showed you earlier. So when we talk about databases and writing to databases, tables, and more, we can also explore all the data you have on your current environment by going to another page called Table Information. Here you can see statistics about each one of your tables. It's a very big page, that's why it's loading. Each one of your pages, how many records it has, what is each one of your records, how many tables it has, how many records it has, what is the table number, what is the size of each one of them, and then index size and more on. What else you can do is, you can, for example, click on the number of records, and that one will open another page where you can inspect in details the data for that current table. You can see all the fields. You can also change the view, and here you can see all the fields and the data field over there. In addition to that table information, we have a few other pages related to databases. So let's just type databases and see what we'll get. So the first one that I'll open is weight statistics. We already saw database logs. Let's go to weight statistics. Here you can see sorted by category how long you have waited for certain operations to be performed. You can see when that operation has started, how long it has taken, and more. And then the last one related to database performance is that actually missing indexes. So what do we do in Business Central is we analyze all of your queries to the database, and we're trying to improve them, right? We can't really alter your code, but we can give you suggestions. So what we do here is we analyze your queries, we see what type of queries you do, and we analyze if you have actually indexes added for these certain search fields, and then we can suggest you missing indexes. Currently, I don't have any because that's a test environment, but you can see yours up here, and that will boost your performance. Good. We talked about databases. Let's now talk about another scenario. Let's imagine that you're writing AO code and you have subscribed to an event, but your event never gets fired and your code never gets executed. And that's what Ida showed is the event recorder, and I don't have the time to actually demo it live, but if we go to event recorder page, we open the event recorder. What I usually do is I open it in a new window and then record the steps of the scenario where you expect your code to be executed. You get something like this. And that's a list of all the events that have been triggered during your scenario. You can see some of them, they code that the type is event trigger, which is the system one, then there are custom events. And then you can check if your event that you have subscribed to is the right one, and then you can analyze why it hasn't been triggered. Good. Let's jump to another page, which is called effective permissions. So here, you can analyze for each one of your users what permissions they have. So what problems might solve that is if you, for example, have single users which cannot, let's say, run a report or they cannot log in, then you can come here and you can analyze per application object if a certain user, you can change the user here, if a certain user has permissions to execute, read, and more. You can also see them by permission sets. Good. What else we can take? We can see here is scheduled tasks. And that's an overview of all the background tasks that are running on the current tenant. You can get more information by going to show job queue details. You can get information about the recurrence of the task. You can also get information about the timeout. For example, the object where that task has been implemented, its ID, or the type, which can be code unit or a report. And when I mentioned reports, I want to show you something. That's the last thing. Let's just go to, I don't know, sales orders. Let's open sales orders. It's a list page, and let's try to report. So what you can do is, I guess if you have events subscribed to when you publish a report, you can actually go and analyze the data without actually publishing it by opening the request page and then pressing consent to. And then here you can select in what data type you want to export that report. And let's say we open it in Excel, and then we say OK, and in a second we downloaded a report, and we can open it in Excel. You can download it as raw data. You can also download it together with the layout, and then you can analyze everything that is up here. Okay, with that being said, we'll move to the next topic, and Kalman will take over.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So let's talk a bit about debugging enhancements, and let's jump with a demo. Yeah, so I was clicking around in order not to kill this session, in order not to waste time for you that I start up and publish something. So I have here a small app that is already debugged. You can't see my screen, can you? Okay. Yep. Okay, better. Sorry. Let's go back. So I have here, can you see? Yeah, it's there, good. So I have here a small app, and what it's going to do, I'm debugging that in Visual Studio Code. So I'm attached to this session. If I click on the action here, like show logs, I mean, it's revealing already what I want to show, yes, and Ida, she was talking about that. So in the database statistics, we have added you a new entry that's about logs. So you will see from now on, as you debug, on each frame, what were the logs taken. So if I go here, I just, I logged the customer table and I did a find first. Then if I continue, I modified the item table so there was another log taken. So, and I think this will be helpful for you as we continue. We may add more things here, but for now you have logs. So let me go back to my presentation. And what other enhancements have we done? So we have added you a new setting to exclude temporary record read write. So if you specify that you don't want to break on temporary records, then you have a new option for that. We have a new setting to exclude breaking on try functions, on errors there. And we have also already added a new entry that besides your application object, you can also specify which startup company you are going to use when you say F5 or Control F5. So let's jump to the next topic. That's about snapshot debugging. So how many of you have used snapshot debugging? I think, yeah, okay, good, some, yeah, good. Well, so what is snapshot debugging? So let's try to define what we are doing here. So you can imagine snapshot debugging as being, it's really something like that. It's a video recorder, but it doesn't take frames, picture frames, it takes stack frames. So what it does, it listens as AL executes on the business central server, and it records all stack frames. And at given well-defined points, which we call snap points, it is going to take context. And what do I mean by context? At these points, these well-defined points, we are going to take all variables, globals and locals. And so snapshot debugging is not as intrusive as normal debugging. We could never allow you to debug production environments with the real debugger. The only way to do this is the snapshot debugger. So in a nutshell, how do you do this operation? So everything starts from Visual Studio Code. You set your snap points, and then you start a snapshot debugging session. Then you perform your scenario, and then you stop snapshot debugging and download a snapshot file. This will be a local file on your disk, which we made it debuggable. As any debugging, snapshot has its own launch.configuration. configuration. So let me just mention a few things that may be different and completely other than in other debugging types. So one is the session ID. The session ID is an integer, like Nikolay has just presented to you. You can see it on the help and support page. So what does it mean? If you specify a session ID in your launch.json, then a snapshot debugger session may try to attach to that session if it finds it. Then you can specify a user ID. This is the ID of a user that you want to attach to. Then you can specify something called snapshot verbosity. So AL execution, so AL itself, as any client communicates with the server, is quite a chatty operation. So there are many AL calls. So if you don't want a large file, you can only say that I want to collect stack frames on snap points. And then you can specify an execution context and a profiling type. And what are these? Snapshot debugging is also used for profiling. So you can specify whether you want to debug, profile, or both. And if you are profiling, what kind of profiling you want to perform. But later on these. So what are snap points? I was all talking about, what are these? So they are nothing else but breakpoints. But there is a big difference between a debugger breakpoint and a snap point, is that if you do a snapshot debugging session, you have to sort of know what you will do, and you have to place these breakpoints, snap points, ahead of time. Because these are the only places where variables are going to be collected. So how do you do all these things? You go to Visual Studio Code, you create your snapshot JSON file, and then basically you will use the command, or you press F7. So when you have initialized the snapshot, there are many things that can happen. If you specify the session ID, then it will immediately connect to that session. If not, it's going to sit on some Business Central server, and it's going to wait for the next client that you specified with the break on next to connect. You can view all snapshots, like clicking this button here on the left bottom side of Visual Studio Code, and that will show you the status of all snapshot sessions that you have started. So when you are done with your scenario, then you press Alt F7, or you issue the command, and that will basically download you a zip file. So let's just go through the states, because this can be confusing when you do snapshots. So there are 4 states. There is an initialized. That's when the server is waiting to connect to a next client. Then you have started it. And when your state is started, that's when you should do your scenario. And when you finished it, then that's the finished state. And then when you have downloaded a snapshot, then you can debug it. So you can only debug downloaded snapshots. And warning. So, snapshot debugging more or less happens on other users' connection. So that other user will get notified by this big dialog box that somebody is sneaking into your session. And because of this, not everybody can do a snapshot debugging session. So you need to get this permission set. And so all the other things that we have in debugging, like resource exposure and non-debuggable methods and dynamic IP protections, are respected as with the normal debugger. I said that snapshot debugging is not as intrusive as the real debugger, but it's still, you are basically fishing on a production server where many other people are doing their job. So, we have some limits. You have only 10 minutes for a scenario. And so once you are in an initialized state, you have 30 minutes to get to a started state. Otherwise, your session is going to be kicked out. And after 10 minutes, whatever you recorded, that's going to be your snapshot. Yeah, so once you finish, then you downloaded a file. That's a snapshot file. It's downloaded to the snapshots folder. You can override it with the snapshot output path settings. One thing to note here, that snapshot file, so on snap points, we collect variable informations. And variables are considered GDPR compliant data. So handle it with care. I mean, you can distribute it, but just be aware that it may contain GDPR compliant data. And so once you have a file downloaded, you can debug it. So how do you debug it? You just click on the left-hand side button to show all your downloaded sessions, and then you select one, and then debugging will start. And then how this is working is, if you collected snap points, then it will be the first snap point that is going to break. If you don't have snap points, but the execution triggered an error, then all errors, AL errors, are by design considered as snap points. So there will be context on errors, and it will stop on the first error. If you have none of these, then it's the first stack frame, but then probably, you know, your snapshot is not very much usable because, yeah, so you don't have anything there. Okay. So let's demo this thing. So, yep. Okay, for this scenario, this can close. Okay, so this is a risky scenario. Let's do this one. Yeah, it's you know, we are going to snapshot debug web API calls. Yes. And what happens here, I prepare Postman that it runs one of my API pages that I created. And what happens is my web API calls are running on behalf of this customer. You know, this is the one that is running the web API call. The snapshot debugging will be done by delegated admin, not this guy. So I hope you know how to set this up. You know, the first thing we have to do here when we do web API debugging, so we have to get a bearer token for this guy, yes? And in order, you have to set up certain things in Postman, so you have to fill out your client ID and client secrets. You can find that in the app that you have registered with Azure Active Directory, and the same app that is registered for you in Business Central somewhere. So let's get a new access token for this guy. Okay. So I'm going to use this access token to actually do a web API call. This will take some time, and hopefully it will show something, yeah? So, you know, we have an error, yes, you know, and the task now is snapshot debug this error, so see what happens, okay? To do that, I go back to Visual Studio Code, and as I mentioned, I already set this up. I don't want to waste your time. You know, I have a launch.json. It's very simple. It does, you know, it just connects to a production environment. This is what I show you. It happens on a production environment. And yeah, this is my code. So, you know, I already set up just to prove how this snap point thingy work. I already set 3 breakpoints here, okay? Now I'm going to say F7 on this one. Yeah, it's doing something. The snapshot debugger initial request has succeeded. So something appears here. Yeah, I have something initialized. Oops. Oh, you can still see. Only I can't see. Okay. So if I go back to Postman and I repeat my scenario, then, in principle, what should happen here, I should be able to finish it and get a file. See, it already finished because web API sessions are coming, going, yes? So let's download this one. Yeah, so we got a file. So let's try to debug it. So I click on this button, and I open this snapshot file. And once it opens, it stops at the first snap point, okay? So what I said that, you know, that on these things, on snap points, you have variable information, okay? So if I press F5 now, I should hit the next snap point. Good. So I have variable information. If I press F5 again, then I get to some call. What I wanted to emphasize here, and the reason I put this snap point here is I don't know how many of you are knowing that, you know, it is the debug console that I use most to evaluate variables. So in this state, at this line, all, you know, all variables are there. So I can just take this content as text and see what's the value. So you have evaluated. The reason I'm saying this is that if had this been a large text, like 1 kilobyte of data, you wouldn't be able to see. You would only be able to see chunks of this. Okay, and the gutter appeared. It looks like we have a bug because originally it did not appear. So what are these? So these lines are the lines that have been executed while you took a snapshot session. Yes? So for example, this wasn't called, but these were called. And then if I press F5, then I get to this place, which is an error condition. I did not put a snap point on this one. This just appeared because errors are treated as snap points, and we are always going to take information on that one. And the reason why this failed is that my exchange rate is not set up correctly. I mean, this is still good old times. Yeah, look at this one. This is how it looks today. Euro is going down. Okay, so let's continue. One second. Yeah, so just a recap. So what's the big difference between debugging and snapshot debugging? Yeah, snapshot debugging is available in production. Basically, that's it. Normal debugging is not available because it's an intrusive one. Imagine you put a lock on the customer table while you are debug. Okay, so the next topic is profiling. So we have introduced the profiler, the AR profiler, a year ago, as I remember. And what is that? So that profiler, the one that was released 1 year ago, is based on something we call instrumentation. So instrumentation is based on snapshots. And let me just illustrate in a small demo what it is doing. So let's imagine that we are executing a procedure called foo. So as a snapshot goes, it starts, as we entered, we got the stack frame for foo, we start recording, and we record. Then foo was calling some other method, we record that one. And then, we gather the time when other exited, and then we gather the time on when foo exited, and what we get out of these, we have actually measured the so-called full time of how much foo has executed, but we also know the self time. So these are two concepts in the profiler terminology. So a full-time follow method is everything from start to the end. Self-time are basically, you can think of it as the instructions plus system calls, no other AR calls, okay? The next release, I think this was, it was in spring, we have introduced a new profiler, which is based on another technique called sampling. So what's the difference between the two one? Sampling is a way less intrusive operation. So it has much less overhead. And but there are some caveats. Not all calls are captured, so you may miss information, but it's good enough to know what went wrong, in my opinion. Instrumentation, on the other hand, is very resource intensive. It contains more details, but the file is big and everything, So, depending on your scenario, you can use one or the other one. We have, okay, so let me just tell you a few words about this sampling. So how does this work? So imagine that a drum is beating at 100 milliseconds. On-prem, you can customize this 100 milliseconds to your own wish. So let's assume that, first 100 milliseconds passed. Then we are looking at the AL execution. We are looking at the frame, stack frame, and we can see that the run method was called. Then another 100 milliseconds passes. And then we see that run was calling foo, foo was calling bar, and bar was calling small. We record that too. Then another 300 milliseconds pass like this. Then in the 300th millisecond, so either we had run calling foo bar or small, or also small was called. And then execution comes back to run and idle. And as the stack, we are always looking at what was on the top of the stack and how much time it was on the top of the stack. And from this logic, we can deduce what was a method's own time or self-time. And we are going to do some algorithm to deduce what was the full time. And by the end, you get something like this in Visual Studio Code. Yeah, the sampling profiler has two usages. One is in the in-client profiler. It's actually very simple. Ida, she has shown it to you. And for hardcore developers, you can do it from Visual Studio Code by specifying in your snapshot JSON file that you want to do sampling and not instrumentation. So let's demo the AR profiler. The good thing, I'm not going to demo the sampling one because that was shown to you. Now let's go back to the good old one, the instrumentation one. And why am I doing that? Because, previously I did the snapshot debugging session for you. So let's see if we can get some profiling data out of those snapshots. So for that, I'm going to run a command, generate profile file. And then, I have a few snapshots here. Let's choose the last one. So this is going to generate me something called a profile file. A profile file is basically, we have our own extension and we have an editor for this. This editor that you can see, it's it's called ALCPU profile file, but in principle it's following Google's Chromium output. So what do you see here? So you see here, this is called top-down view. So you see call stacks as they were happening. Yes. So what you see here that, on after get character called this method, and then you can see the self time and the total time. So get exchange rates was taking 1 second. And then, I have a method do some delay, which, was taken 1 second. That's it. You have another view called bottom up. In this view, we are going to show you each frame and who called into that frame. So, it's the inverse of what you see before. So, for example, if you want to go a full pass, like get exchange rate was called by get latest exchange rate. This is a base app code, was called by get exchange rate. It was in my code unit, and so on. And then everything started from on after get core record. These are sortable, these columns. And there is a very simple query language in here that we have developed for you. So we are compiler team, so we are writing parsers. So you can press here an @ sign and then type something. And then, it gives you some help that these are the commands that you can use. For example, I can do something like S, like self time greater than 3,000. There is nothing like that, but so 300, and then it will go show you all the frames that had that information. More, if you have the source code, then and the symbols, then you can go to definition by just clicking on any of these. And that's very helpful because then you can analyze, okay, so this took 1 second, but what actually took 1 second there? Yeah, so that said, let's continue. So I was mentioning that this is one view, yeah? So this ARCPU profile, it's an editor, yes? what if you don't like this, you know? Because I said this is Chromium technology. So in principle, you should be able to see all these in other profilers that support Chromium technology. Let's just take a competitor one. Let's see if with the Firefox profiler, we can open our profile. Okay? Before that, let me just take the pass that I don't search a lot here. So load profile from a file. Let's see what happens. Yeah, it understands it. So this is, you know, this is a very good profiler, by the way. You know, it has a much better UI. I have to admit that. So, you know, but it doesn't show the information. So it won't go to source code, and you know, we have additions to this Chromium output, and those, of course, will not be seen here. I can repeat the same scenario for you in F12 in Chrome or Edge. In the developer tools, I can open the same profile file there too. Okay. So back to the slides. So what about, you know, I'm going to finish with this slide here. So you should use the in-client profiler. It's a very, very easy tool. Even your end users could use it. And then you as developers can get the ALCPU profile file that was created by the in-client profiler. And then you can open that in a Visual Studio Code AL project. So just as I'm mentioning, so if you download things from the in-client profiler and you double-click on it, it's not going to open. We don't support yet initializing the AL language server from the in-client profiler. And then if you want hardcore profiling, then use Visual Studio Code with snapshots and samplings. That is going to get you more detailed data. You are not going to lose frames as with instrumentation, but instrumentation is also very helpful if you just want to get started and see what is slow in your system. With this, I think we are done, and don't go away, you know, because we are going to continue. Our colleagues are going to continue with the migration part. So let's just give them like 2 minutes until they prepare the presentation for you. Thank you very much.
So next session, cloud migration. Our speakers, Roman Sauber, Julia Lisovaya, and Nikolay Kukrika.